Good morning, and thanks for joining us on today's call to report Tecnoglass first quarter results. We'll start with the key takeaways. It was a quarter in which top-line revenues were in line with expectations, more or less. We had talked about sequential stable revenues, and that's what we ended up with. However, we did have some underperformance on the single-family residential side, which was partially compensated with slight growth on the top line on the commercial revenue side. The challenges that we saw on the residential side, and we're going to elaborate more on that, are strictly related to what's happening with interest rates. But notably, what we've seen since March and April, based on the level of orders, is a strong pickup in a sequential growth of over 20% sequentially and 12% year over year on that level of orders. So it looks like that dynamic is changing quite a bit, which is encouraging. We'll go into a little more detail there. Strong cash flow from operations, again, $33 million for the quarter. And then obviously with that and our decreasing debt level, we continue to have a record low leverage profile. Record level of orders, as I indicated, and also a record backlog. The backlog continues to grow, hitting $916 million for the quarter. We'll talk about why that's taking place in an environment where everything that we hear is about challenges on the multifamily and commercial segment with lower starts and whatnot. But what's happening is that our markets are clearly outperforming the broader U.S. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. We also updated what we're thinking for the year. We provided 3 different scenarios. Clearly, there's a lot of moving pieces from a macro perspective, from an interest rates perspective. So we thought that we provide a lot of detail as to how we're seeing each one of those scenarios playing out. Moving on to the backlog, as I just mentioned, again, we continue that trajectory of growth into record levels, $916 million, which obviously provides a lot of visibility, not only for 24, but well into 2025. So that's encouraging, and hopefully, the trend of interest rates continue to go in the right direction, and we continue a strong cycle of construction in the main markets where we operate, which is a key factor to highlight, because again, it seems like a lot of people are negative on many different pockets of construction throughout the U.S. on the commercial segment, but the main markets where we operate continue to do very well. As a result of this, we continue to have a book-to-bill ratio of 1.2 times, so we're more than replacing what we're invoicing, and we expect that trend to continue for the foreseeable future based on the pipeline activity that we're seeing right now. On the next slide, we highlight the backlog conversion, which is one of the key questions that we get as to how sticky the backlog is and how much confidence we have that we can execute on that backlog. Remember that a lot of the projects that we are including here have already broken ground and are up and going. And generally, windows as a whole end up kind of getting a project at a latter stage of those projects, so very little cancellations. And you see that in this graph. Roughly 66% of the backlog reported gets converted in the first 12 months, and 100% gets converted into the following 18 months. So that provides a lot of good visibility. In line with what I mentioned on our markets, just in the South Florida area, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach, there's roughly 750 projects that are taking off or up and going. So the level of activity continues to be robust, and we're seeing the results of that with the growing backlog that I just highlighted. Single family residential, as I mentioned, was challenged. It was challenged Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year, and I think that comes to no surprise based on what's happening with interest rates. But it was very encouraging to see the order levels for March and April, which will be invoiced later, probably in the second quarter of this year, going up 20% sequentially and over 12% year over year. It was a nice pickup. May orders are coming strong as well. So We'll see how sustainable that is, but the clear signs point for a pretty good turnaround based on what we saw against Q1 of this year. On the next slide, we wanted to highlight what's happening with vinyl. As we highlighted on the last call, Q1 was essentially spent doing sampling and testing. We expect this to start contributing significantly or more meaningfully after Q2. Based on the quoting level that we're seeing right now, we're encouraged by the prospects for the second half of the year. The quoting level of activity is ahead of what we had expected, so far so good. And we start again delivering more of that after the Q2 of this year, once a lot of the sampling is done and a lot of the testing is done. This is also encompassed in the three different scenarios that we put out there for providing guidance for the full year. So you'll see how we're feeling as to what kind of level of revenues we can do for that segment going forward. And the good thing about this is that we have roughly 50 to 55 dealers that have been working with us for a long time on the aluminum segment that also sell vinyl. So that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit and the easy kind of sale. Not easy, but the early sale that we can essentially ramp up this vinyl product with. Moving on to the revenue bridge. Again, single-family residential was the driver of revenue decrease. Commercial actually went up slightly quarter over quarter against 2023. But as we said in our previous call, we had expected this quarter to be more or less in line with Q4 of 23, and we expect sequential growth from here on out based on the scheduled deliveries of the commercial projects. And again, based on the level of orders that we're seeing right now on the single-family residential side, plus the fact that we expect vinyl to pick up in the second half of the year. On the EBITDA bridge, we saw obviously a pretty big impact on FX. We knew this was coming, and I think we had discussed this in the previous call. We had very tough comps year over year. FX accounted for about 800 basis points of negative impact, essentially going from an all-time low for the peso in 2023, roughly around January, February, to a much more level FX relation in Q4 in Q4 of last year, and now Q1 of this year, at a pretty much neutral stance from a technical perspective, roughly 4,000 pesos per dollar. So that created a pretty significant impact with this 18% revaluation. Also, we had some deleveraging, obviously, when you have less revenues, and the fact that all salaries in Colombia are adjusted at the beginning of the year. We had a lesser amount of revenues with higher salaries Q1, so that also impacted from a leveraging perspective. And finally, mix in pricing accounting for some of that, with more installation and a standalone product sales being done in Q1 of this year versus Q1 of last year. Moving on to our balance sheet, it continues to be in the best shape it's been, 0.1 times leverage. Cash balance was at an all-time high of 136 million. So we continue to have a lot of flexibility to execute our strategy to essentially return cash to shareholders, as we've done with our dividend and buybacks. So we continue to be very well positioned to execute going forward as we continue to grow and execute on our strategy. Finally, on our guidance, as I had mentioned earlier, we provided three different scenarios ranging from revenues of 850 million, which equates to 2% growth, to 910 million, which equates to almost 10% growth year over year. On an EBITDA basis, obviously, we have the impact on FX, which accounts for roughly 300 basis points against the average for full 2023. So we're modeling EBITDA reaching up to 285 million. And at the low point of these three prone scenario, 250 million. So we hope to see you in the next quarter and hope to deliver sequential growth as I outlined. And with that, I'll leave you, and thanks for joining us for today's call. Bye.